That's going to be cover of Modern Drummer magazine is going to be devoted to that drum fill.
It's amazing that you could play that drum fill in 9 beats.
Right?
It's fantastic.
Just because you get lost, just because it's a little confusing for the bass playing element.
The year was 1977, and London's vibrant music scene, pulsating with punk's raw energy and the emerging nuances of new wave, saw the unlikely formation of The Police.
They came together amid the thrash and passion of punk. But The Police didn't sound like punk.
Gordon Sumner, known to all as Sting, a jazz bassist and former schoolteacher from Newcastle, possessed an undeniable melodic flair and a burgeoning ambition for songwriting. Stewart Copeland, an American drummer with a restless, almost chaotic energy, brought a background steeped in progressive rock and a touch of punk attitude gleaned from his time with Curved Air. He was, undeniably, the initial catalyst for the band's existence.
I was playing in a band called Curved Air, which had been a quite successful sort of goth rock band in England.
Andy Summers, the seasoned older guitarist, provided a sophisticated textural layer and a crucial grounding presence.
It was absolutely crucial that they met Andy Summers.
He brought the ability into the band for me to realize my aspirations and that I could write more sophisticated songs, all from very different experiences, lifestyles, and personalities.
I was urgent, Andy was irascible, and Sting was mysterious.
It just kind of grew into 3 guys that made this sort of one unique sound.
From its very inception, The Police was a powerful amalgamation of talent, yet it was equally a crucible of clashing personalities, with the most pronounced friction boiling between its magnetic frontman and its highly dynamic drummer. Stewart, ever the visionary and the initial driving force, had actively sought out Sting, captivated by his distinctive stage presence and unique vocal timbre. In his memoir, Strange Things Happen, he vividly recalled Sting as this guy with an orange bass and a voice like an angel. Their earliest days were marked by a shared, almost desperate excitement and a collective hunger for success, which initially masked the profound cracks beneath their individual egos. They found common ground in their battle against obscurity and poverty. However, beneath this veneer of youthful camaraderie lay deeply ingrained differences in their musical philosophies and personal styles, differences that were destined to erupt.
As the band's music changed, the volatile personal dynamic within the trio was also changing.
Sting was the quintessential cerebral artist, a poetic songwriter who meticulously crafted lyrics and melodies, often envisioning entire intricate sonic landscapes. Copeland, conversely, was the visceral, explosive percussionist for whom the beat was king, a whirlwind of percussive energy aimed at igniting every performance. He perceived music as an act of pure, unbridled, immediate energy. The fundamental differences in Sting's meticulous, song-oriented approach and Stewart's spontaneous, rhythm-driven philosophy, coupled with Sting's rapidly increasing dominance as the primary songwriter, began to create an unspoken yet palpable tension regarding creative control and the band's ultimate artistic direction.
Stewart wasn't writing all the songs anymore either. Sting had begun to assert himself as a songwriter.
I had a whole backlog of songs from my teenage years that some of them ended up as Police songs.
Songs that would soon lift the Police out of their obscurity.
Truly wounding battles where we had plenty of time to consider, in cold blood, the best way to hurt each other. That was in the studio.
This unspoken tension swiftly escalated into increasingly vocal and frequently physical confrontations as the band's sound began to solidify and their time in the recording studio became more focused and intense. As the Police shed their raw, punk-infused beginnings and evolved into a more polished, reggae-influenced new wave sound, the struggle for sonic supremacy became the central arena for their disputes. Sting, with his deep jazz roots, craved precision and ample space within the music. He desired his bass lines and vocals to breathe, insisting that the drums should primarily support the song's structure rather than overtly dominating it. Stewart, conversely, championed his drumming as a lead instrument, a powerful, almost untamed force designed to push musical boundaries and inject raw, electrifying energy into every single track. One of the earliest and most telling examples of this recurring clash manifested during the recording of their second album, Regatta de Blanc, released in October 1979. While this album still featured more collaborative songwriting credits than their subsequent works, the studio environment was already a fierce proving ground for their individual wills. Stewart's relentless, almost manic energy, stemming from his unique internal rhythm and an unwavering desire to make every drum feel memorable, frequently collided with Sting's vision for a more minimalist, distinctly reggae-inflected groove.
Stewart Copeland and Andy Summers confronted the fact that Sting was starting to dominate the Police.
Sting, as detailed in numerous band biographies and interviews, would consistently chastise Stewart for what he perceived as overplaying. He passionately advocated for a less is more philosophy, desiring a sparse, almost skeletal rhythm section that would exquisitely allow his melodic bass lines and poignant vocals to shine through. Stewart, in turn, found Sting's demands profoundly creatively stifling. He recalled in a BBC interview from 2012 that Sting would often bark, "Just play the beat, just play the beat." Yet Stewart felt an irresistible urge to embellish, to infuse his unique idiosyncratic flares into every rhythm. "My mission was to burn the building down," he once quipped, vividly describing his aggressive, unbridled approach to drumming.
They were constantly doing this push-pull thing of admiring each other and trying to cut off each other at the knees at the same time. That could not continue.
This deep, fundamental disagreement over the fundamental role of the drums, whether as a supportive foundation or as a dynamic leading voice, became the pervasive and irritating theme of their persistent studio arguments. As the Police's global popularity exploded, the stakes in these intense creative battles amplified considerably. Their third album, Zenyatta Mondata, released in October 1980, saw even more pronounced and acrimonious disagreements. By this crucial point, Sting was firmly established as the primary, almost sole songwriter, a role that further solidified his perceived right to dictate precisely how his intricate compositions should be played. Stewart, though immensely proud of the band's staggering success, increasingly felt his creative input was being systematically curtailed and undervalued.
There would often be tension building up during the set. You could feel Stewart maybe resenting, oh, now we're going into another one of Sting's long-winded songs, and Sting was resenting the fact that Stewart was overplaying, and if Andy played more than 8 bars of a solo, Sting would give him that look.
The studio transformed into an emotional battleground where every single drum fill, every nuanced bass line, every subtle guitar chord was scrutinized, debated, and fiercely argued over. Andy Summers, frequently caught in the unenviable position of mediator, later reflected on the palpable tension in his autobiography, One Train Later, noting the chilling animosity that often pervaded the recording studio. The intense desire for each to assert his unique and distinct musical identity, while paradoxically contributing to the Police's groundbreaking and distinct sound, was simultaneously tearing them apart at the seams.
Andy was the sensible member of the band, and if it hadn't been for Andy, Sting and I would have killed each other.
Well, I had to beat Stewart and Sting up, a lot. Most of the time it was like a full frontal assault being in that band.
This escalating tension over Sting's meticulous musical direction versus Stewart's explosive drumming style led to open arguments and profound frustration throughout their studio sessions. This open frustration and a relentless clash of wills, perpetually fueled by intense industry pressure and undeniably towering egos, eventually spilled over from heated verbal sparring into outright physical altercations, becoming a notorious and uncomfortable hallmark of their working relationship. The recording studio, a space meticulously designed for creative output and collaboration, frequently morphed into a literal boxing ring for Sting and Stewart. These fights were far from isolated incidents, rather they were a recurring feature, a stark testament to the raw, untamed energy and simmering aggression that so often defined their interactions.
We were in this state where any little incident would turn into World War III.
One of the most widely reported and enduring tales of their physical confrontations unfolded just before a massive, career-defining concert at Shea Stadium in August 1983. Stewart Copeland himself has recounted the incident in numerous interviews, often with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, yet never fully diminishing the severity of it at the time. The argument, almost comically, began over an utterly trivial matter: a newspaper. As Stewart tells the story, Sting simply grabbed a newspaper that Stewart was reading, immediately sparking an explosive escalation. "I cracked one of his ribs before a show at Shea Stadium," Stewart candidly admitted in an interview with The Independent in 2015.
As they became superstars, the tension between them became supercharged.
The emotional dynamic. There we go, there's one for you.
It could be loving and friendly, and then it could be just, I'm gonna punch your face in.
He often retrospectively described these fights as mere play fighting, but the reality was that they were aggressive, violent outbursts, clear reflections of deep-seated and unresolved frustrations. The mere notion of one band member inflicting a physical injury on another, especially just moments before a major sold-out performance, vividly highlights the sheer, unbridled intensity of their animosity. It transcended a mere creative disagreement. It had become a profoundly personal conflict, manifesting in a raw, primal manner. These frequent physical confrontations were not limited to a single memorable event.
Always a little raw, a little edgy.
Die! It was like a slow-motion breakup all the way through.
But there's no question that the three of us, as a unit, captured the imagination of the world.
The relentless pressure of burgeoning fame, coupled with their inherently strong, unyielding, and often uncompromising personalities, ensured that these explosive outbursts were almost inevitable. The very act of collaboratively creating music, which ideally should have been a unifying and joyful force, often tragically became the very catalyst for these violent and damaging ruptures. This profoundly poisoned collaborative atmosphere reached its absolute nadir during the recording of the Police's final studio album, Synchronicity, in 1983. The idyllic, serene island of Montserrat, where the recording took place, was tragically transformed into an inescapable pressure cooker where the band effectively imploded, leading inexorably to the band's unofficial and acrimonious demise. The recording of Synchronicity became infamous within industry circles for the band's incredibly fractured and highly antagonistic working method. Hugh Padgham, the album's producer, who had previously endured their dynamic on Ghost in the Machine, bore witness to unprecedented levels of overt animosity.
All three guys were quite competitive, and that surprised me, but I think it gave it a certain energy for sure.
He confirmed in numerous interviews that Sting and Stewart would rarely, if ever, be in the studio simultaneously.
I remember getting a call from Hugh Padgham saying, I can't work in the studio anymore, they're just arguing and there's all kinds of problems.
Sting would typically arrive in the afternoons, and his very first act would frequently be to meticulously scrutinize, and all too often, simply erase the drum parts that Stewart had painstakingly laid down that morning. Stewart, in turn, found Sting's precise, almost tyrannical control over his drumming utterly intolerable and deeply insulting. This was not merely a disagreement over a specific drum fill, it represented a systemic, almost malicious, dismantling of one's creative contribution by the other.
By that time it felt to me that it was Sting's band. He wrote all bar 2 songs on the record, and he had a good idea of how he wanted them to be.
The recording process for monumental tracks like Every Breath You Take perfectly epitomizes this total breakdown. Sting had a very clear, almost painfully minimalist vision for the song, including a hypnotic, repetitive drum machine pattern. Stewart, ever the powerhouse drummer, was desperate to add his signature, more flamboyant flourishes.
Every smile you fake, every claim you stick, I'll be watching you.
According to Padham, in a 2003 interview with Sound on Sound magazine, Stewart wanted to play on it. But Sting was quite adamant that he didn't want him playing on it, he actually wanted a drum machine. The resulting compromise was a painful, protracted negotiation, with Copeland eventually overdubbing a subtle hi-hat part that Sting still found frustratingly too busy. This constant, exhausting push and pull, with Sting ultimately wielding the most undeniable power as both the songwriter and the lead vocalist, led to immense, suffocating frustration for Stewart. I can recall the actual day that we were recording that song, Stewart reflected candidly in his documentary Can't Stand Losing You, Surviving the Police. And the arguments that were going on that day, between me and Sting, it was horrible.
He comes in with a fully produced demo track, which sounds like the record ought to sound, and I just had to put my mark on it, and that became the battle.
The atmosphere in the studio was so intensely charged that even Andy Summers, typically the mediating and more composed figure, found it utterly unbearable. He spent much of his time deliberately away from the studio when he wasn't recording his own specific parts.
There was a knot like this in the middle of the recording, but we got through it and we went on and we finished the album.
The band's interactions were reduced to what was absolutely necessary for the album's completion, fueled purely by professional obligation rather than any remaining semblance of artistic camaraderie. The very creative tension that had once been the wellspring of their unique and groundbreaking sound had curdled irretrievably into outright hostility.
What the Beatles were in the 60s, the Police were in 1983. They were the biggest band in the world.
They kicked ass.
The Synchronicity album, despite its immense commercial success and widespread critical acclaim, effectively sounded the definitive death knell for the Police as a genuinely functioning and collaborative band. Each member, particularly Sting, had mentally and emotionally moved on, actively preparing for their inevitable solo careers. Following the monumental success of Synchronicity and the exhaustive accompanying world tour, which finally concluded in March 1984, the members of the Police went their separate ways, not with a formal public announcement of disbandment, but with a palpable and collective sense of profound relief. The deep-seated animosity, which had been simmering for years and had violently exploded during their final recording sessions, made the very prospect of any continued collaboration utterly unthinkable, particularly for Sting.
The Police conquered the world, then went their separate ways.
Stop. Now, at the top.
It was like a marriage that was over.
It was suddenly like, I think I felt like I walked off the edge of a cliff. We weren't the band anymore. Although no one knew it, it was a very bizarre time.
The Police have broken up. Can you confirm that?
It's outrageous. I wonder if it's true. I don't know. Is it true? Are the Police
Sting, whose prodigious songwriting had been the driving force behind the Police's meteoric rise to superstardom, was the first to fully embrace a solo career, swiftly releasing his acclaimed jazz-infused debut album, The Dream of the Blue Turtles, in June 1985.
Such an ignorant thing to do if the Russians love their children too.
His departure was less of a conscious decision and more of an inevitable evolution. He had felt profoundly creatively constrained by the rigid band format, particularly by the unrelenting rhythmic demands and the constant, debilitating friction with Stewart. In various interviews over the years, Sting has often alluded to the immense relief he felt in finally being able to control his musical direction entirely without compromise. "I felt that I was reaching a kind of glass ceiling with the Police," he candidly told Rolling Stone in 2019, reflecting on his pivotal decision to go solo. "I wanted to explore different genres, different musicians. This overwhelming desire for absolute creative autonomy was a direct and undeniable consequence of the bruising battles he had endured with Stewart. Stewart Copeland, equally as driven, though in a different artistic direction, also immediately launched himself into a myriad of diverse projects. He meticulously composed intricate film scores, collaborated with an eclectic range of musicians, and passionately explored various facets of world music, his unique, energetic drumming finding new and exciting outlets. While he openly harboured a strong desire for the police to reform much earlier than they eventually did, he also soberly acknowledged the deep-seated and intractable issues that had long prevented it.
Just mention of anything to do with the police made me break out into cold shakes.
In his autobiography, Strange Things Happen, he reflects on the dysfunctional family dynamic that epitomized the police, noting pointedly that the love-hate relationship was profoundly real and ever-present. Andy Summers too embarked on a successful solo career, releasing intricate instrumental albums and working extensively as a session musician, often reflecting philosophically on the volatile nature of his former bandmates. This decades-long separation and pursuit of individual musical ventures, while undeniably successful, also allowed the members, particularly Sting and Stewart, to gain invaluable perspective on their past conflicts and to mature significantly both personally and artistically. After 23 years of being a definitively defunct entity, the unexpected announcement of a reunion tour in 2007 sent genuine shockwaves through the entire music world. It stood as a powerful testament to the enduring, almost mythical power of their music and the public's overwhelming desire to see them together once more.
Work the street for money. You don't care if it's wrong or if it's right.
Yet for the band members themselves, it was also a crucial, perhaps therapeutic opportunity to confront and potentially reconcile with their turbulent and often painful past. The reunion was, predictably, not without its challenges, and the old ingrained dynamic, though significantly tempered by age and newfound maturity, occasionally resurfaced with familiar echoes. Stewart Copeland, notably the more outwardly effusive of the two, was particularly candid about the lingering tensions, often affectionately describing the band's dynamic as being like siblings. In his memoir, and in numerous interviews conducted during the tour, he spoke openly of how the familiar arguments, particularly over intricate musical dynamics, would still flare up with surprising regularity. "We would be arguing about something to do with the music," he told The Guardian in 2007, "and suddenly we'd be talking about who left the toilet seat up."
There is something new about this version of the band, which wasn't like that 20 years ago, that I've noticed.
Tell us, remind us.
What it is that we get up real early in the morning. We eat all of our vegetables. Everybody in this band is like, there's almost like a competition as to who can like work the hardest, think the most, and we work harder at getting our craft right than we ever did when we were young and arrogant.
This humorous yet revealing anecdote powerfully underscored that while they were indeed older and wiser, the fundamental personality clashes that fueled their past disputes were still inherently present, albeit softened by a greater capacity for self-awareness and, crucially, a unifying shared goal of executing a successful and financially lucrative tour.
Well, it's opening night in Vancouver, and the police haven't played officially since Melbourne in 1983.
Andy, you ready to walk?
It's time to move.
That is not a lucky sign.
However, the passage of time also ushered in a significant degree of perspective and, surprisingly, even a growing fondness. Sting, who had been the most vocally resistant to a reunion for many years, reluctantly acknowledged the unique and undeniable magic they had collectively created. While he had undoubtedly relished the profound creative freedom of his solo career, he also recognized the irreplaceable energy and distinct contributions that Stewart and Andy unequivocally brought to the Police's iconic sound. In a 2017 interview with CBS Sunday Morning, Sting reflected thoughtfully on their reunion, stating, "We did the reunion, which was great. We made some money, but we also kind of healed some wounds." The tour, while physically demanding and emotionally complex for all involved, allowed them to tap into the powerful, almost alchemical synergy they once shared, albeit now with a more professional and necessary distance than in their volatile youth. They learned to navigate their ingrained differences with far greater restraint and maturity, consistently prioritizing the electrifying performance and the audience's experience over their long-standing personal friction.